The cabin door creaked open against the howling December wind of 1872. Samuel Garrett, a man who hadn't touched a woman in 8 long years, found himself staring into the storm. And the storm stared back with 3 pairs of dark, desperate eyes. Apache women, soaked to the bone, shivering, their faces etched with a fear that went deeper than the cold. Behind them, the Arizona Territory was a white hell, endless and unforgiving. In front of them was Sam's life, a tiny cabin, barely 16 by 20 feet, 1 room, 1 bed, and 1 man who had made a sacred promise to a dead wife. His weathered hands, hands that had built this cabin for a future that never came, gripped the doorframe. He looked at the eldest, Ayanna. Her wet buckskin dress clung to her body, and her proud chin was lifted against the blizzard that turned her lips blue. Her sisters, Itel and the much younger Nayeli, huddled behind her, their bodies trembling with a terror that had nothing to do with the weather. "Please," Ayanna's voice was a ragged whisper, her breath a cloud of steam between them. "We die out here." 8 years. For 8 long years, Sam had honored his Sarah. He'd kept his heart locked away, a dusty shrine to a love buried 6 feet under the unforgiving Arizona dirt. Now, 3 temptations stood on his doorstep, asking for sanctuary in the most dangerous place on earth. He should have said no. He should have closed the door and let the storm have them. But he didn't. And in that moment of weakness, he sealed his fate. They stumbled inside like ghosts, creatures from a fever dream that the blizzard had coughed up. They moved with the impossible grace of their people, even as exhaustion pulled at their every limb. Ayanna, the leader, carried herself with an authority that defied her ragged condition. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the small cabin, missing nothing. She saw the single chair, the lonely hearth, the faded photograph on the mantel. She saw the ghost of the woman who lived here. Her sisters flanked her like protective shadows. "We are daughters of Cochise's cousin," Ayanna said, her English broken but firm. "Soldiers come to reservation. Say we go to New Mexico place. We run." Sam knew the story. He'd heard the whispers in Prescott. The army was clearing the reservations, scattering families like dandelion seeds in the wind, breaking their spirits piece by piece. He looked at the middle sister, Itel. She swayed on her feet, her face pale, a sheen of sweat on her brow despite the freezing cold. Even soaked and shivering, her beauty was unsettling. High cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, and a strange stillness about her. Then he saw it. A dark stain spreading on the buckskin near her hip. It wasn't mud. "She's sick," Ayanna said, her hand gesturing toward Itel. But her eyes darted to the stain for a fraction of a second. "Need warm. Need safe." The youngest, Nayeli, couldn't have been more than 20. While her sisters carried the weight of tragedy, she still had a spark of life, of untamed curiosity in her gaze. Her eyes wandered around the cabin, taking in the details. The blue-flowered plates Sarah had loved, the wedding ring on Sam's finger, and the photograph. "Your woman," Nayeli said, her voice soft as falling snow. "Very beautiful." Sam's throat felt like it was full of gravel. She was. Ayanna's gaze met his, and in her dark eyes he saw a reflection of his own loss. "You understand," she said. It wasn't a question. For a long moment, the only sounds were the fire crackling and the wind screaming like a banshee against the windows. In that small, warm space, there were 4 people, 3 Apache women who had lost everything, and 1 white man who had lost his only reason to live. "You can't stay long," Sam heard himself say, the words feeling foreign in his own mouth. He was already moving, pulling his thickest wool blankets from the cedar chest at the foot of his bed. "Cavalry patrols come through here. If they find you—" "We know danger," Ayanna cut him off, her voice steel. For you too. And that was it. That was the moment the choice was made. Not by his head, but by some deeper, older part of him. The same part that had held Sarah's hand as the fever took her. The same stubborn honor that had kept him alone, faithful to a memory for nearly a decade. He was a fool. A damned fool. He handed the thickest blanket to Ayanna. Take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. No, Itel protested, her voice weak. Your bed. But her words were lost in a violent shiver that shook her entire frame. Sam saw her knees buckle. He moved fast, catching her before she hit the floorboards. Her body was light, fragile, but burning with a fever he could feel even through the wet buckskin. You'll take it, and that's final, he growled, his voice rougher than he intended. He lifted her easily and carried her to the bed, laying her down gently. She was already half unconscious, her breathing shallow. He turned his back, giving the sisters what little privacy he could offer in the tiny room. There's food in the larder, coffee on the stove. Get out of those wet clothes. As he arranged his own bedroll near the hearth, he tried to ignore the sounds behind him, the soft rustle of wet leather being peeled away, the whispered Apache words, the graceful movement of silhouettes in the firelight. He stared into the flames, feeling the heat on his face, but a different kind of heat was spreading through his veins. 8 years of celibacy, 8 years of ghosts and silence. Now his cabin was filled with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and women. One small cabin, one long winter, and a secret that was already starting to fester. By the 3rd day, the world outside had vanished. The blizzard had buried them, transforming the Arizona high country into a frozen, silent tomb. Inside, a strange new rhythm had taken hold. Itel's fever had broken thanks to a poultice of herbs Ayanna had found in a small leather pouch. She moved through the cabin now with a quiet efficiency, her gentle hands turning Sam's meager supplies of jerky and beans into something that tasted like home. Nayeli, the curious one, had appointed herself Sam's shadow. She watched him shave, her eyes wide with fascination at the straight razor. She found his small collection of books and traced the English letters with her finger, asking him the names for everything. Her laughter, the first real laughter this cabin had heard in 8 years, was like a spring thaw in the corners of his soul. But it was Ayanna who watched him, Ayanna who unsettled him. Her dark eyes saw everything, the way his hands shook when he handed her a cup of coffee, the way he meticulously avoided looking at them when they moved about the room, the way he still twisted the gold wedding band on his finger, a shield against a world he no longer wanted any part of. "You are a good man, Samuel Garrett," she said on the 3rd evening. Itel and Nayeli were asleep, curled together on his bed like kittens. The two of them sat by the fire, the silence between them thick with unspoken things. "But you carry a great weight," she said, pressing a hand to her own chest. "Here." Sam stared into the fire. The flames danced, and he tried not to notice how the blanket had slipped from Ayanna's shoulder, revealing the smooth, fire-kissed skin beneath. "Some weights," he said, his voice hoarse, "can't be put down." "My grandmother said the heart is like a river," Ayanna replied, her voice low and melodic. "When you build a dam, the water does not vanish. It finds another way. Sometimes it destroys everything in its path. And sometimes," Sam countered, "the river just dries up." She moved closer then, so close he could smell the sweet, clean scent of her hair, something like pine and wild sage, so close he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her dark, endless eyes. "Do you think your woman would want you to dry up, to become an empty man?" The question was a punch to the gut. His hand instinctively went to the ring, turning it. "I made a promise." "To love her forever?" "Yes," Ayanna said softly. But did you promise to stop living? She tilted her head toward the mantel, toward Sarah's smiling face in the photograph. The woman in the picture? Does she look like someone who would want her man to shrivel up like old corn in the sun? He couldn't look. He couldn't bear to see that smile and imagine what she would think of this. 3 Apache women in her cabin, in her home, slowly, piece by piece, dismantling the fortress he had built around his heart. It's complicated, he finally managed to say. No, a sleepy voice murmured from the bed. It was Nayeli, her eyes still closed. Not complicated. White men make everything difficult. In our tribe, when a good man loses his woman, the mothers of the tribe find him a new one. Life is too hard for a man to be alone. Nayeli, Ayanna warned gently. It is true, Nayeli insisted, sitting up now, the blanket pooling around her waist. You fight too hard against what is natural. Etel stirred, her soft laugh joining her sister's. She is right. You wrestle with your own heart like it is a bear. He was surrounded, trapped not by enemies but by a gentle, relentless conspiracy of women who saw right through him. They had somehow, in just 3 days, turned his shrine to the dead into a home for the living. And as the wind howled outside with renewed fury, Sam felt something stir deep inside him. Something he had thought was buried forever with his wife. A treacherous, terrifying warmth. He looked at Ayanna, then at Etel and Nayeli. He saw no judgment in their eyes, only a deep, patient understanding that frightened him more than any cavalry patrol. Then Etel coughed, a dry, racking sound. She pressed a hand to her side, and a flicker of pain crossed her beautiful face. The wound. The one they never spoke of. The secret he had pretended not to see. He knew in that moment that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break inside his cabin. The next morning, the fragile peace shattered. It wasn't the sound of gunfire that woke him, but a low moan of pain from the bed. Sam was on his feet in an instant. Etel was writhing, her face slick with sweat, her teeth clenched. The fever was back, and it was worse than before. Ayanna was at her side, her face a mask of worry. She pulled back the blanket, and Sam's breath caught in his throat. The poultice had come loose. The wound on her side, which he had only glimpsed before, was now fully visible. It wasn't just a simple cut. The flesh around it was angry, red and swollen, with dark veins spreading out from the center like a black spider web. This is no trail wound, he said, his voice low. I saw enough of these in the war. That's poison. Ayanna's eyes met his, and for the first time he saw fear in them. We were followed, she whispered. A man, not a soldier. He shot at us from the rocks. What kind of arrow? Sam demanded, his mind racing. Not arrow, Nayeli said, her voice trembling. A dart, from a blowgun. He was Apache, but not of our people, a scout for the soldiers. An Apache scout using a poisoned dart. It made no sense. This wasn't just a random patrol chasing runaways. This was a hunt. They were being hunted by someone who wanted them dead, not captured. I need to clean it, Sam said, taking charge. Boil some water. Get me clean rags. He went to the small chest where Sarah had kept her things, her medical supplies. He hadn't opened it in 8 years. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. The scent of dried lavender and rosemary filled the air, a ghost of his wife's presence. Inside were neatly bundled herbs, tinctures in small glass bottles, and her journal, filled with her elegant handwriting, detailing the properties of different plants. Sarah had been a healer, not just with the simple remedies of a settler's wife. She had studied, learned from the local tribes, a fact that had made some of the other white women in Prescott whisper. As he rummaged through the supplies, Ayanna came to his side. Her eyes fell on the journal. She pointed to a drawing on an open page. a sketch of a flower with a distinctive purple blossom and dark, serrated leaves. "This," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Do you have this?" Sam looked at the drawing. He remembered Sarah finding that plant, high in the canyons. She had warned him about it. Devil's breath, she'd called it. She said the smallest amount could cause a burning fever, madness, and then death. It was a poison known only to a few reclusive Apache clans, and it was the same plant Itel had used in her poultice. "No," Ayanna said, shaking her head, her eyes wide. "This is what was on the dart. I saw the residue. I thought this," she pointed to Itel's herb pouch, "would be the antidote. In our stories, the cure often grows beside the poison." Sam's blood ran cold. She hadn't been trying to cure her sister. She had been poisoning her. Unknowingly, but she had been making it worse, concentrating the poison right into the wound. He grabbed the journal and frantically flipped through the pages. His eyes scanned Sarah's notes. Antidote. Antidote. There it was. A different plant. Willow bark for the fever. And something else. A rare root called stoneheart, found only near underground springs. "I know a place," he said, his mind made up. "A cave, a few miles from here. There's a spring inside. I've seen this root there." "You cannot," Ayanna protested. "The storm." "She'll be dead by morning if I don't," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He was already pulling on his heaviest coat, grabbing his rifle. "Keep her cool. Force water into her if you can. And for God's sake, keep that other stuff away from her." He looked at the three of them. The fierce leader, the innocent girl, the dying beauty. He had let them into his cabin to save them from the storm. Now he had to go out into that same storm to save one of them from a death much more sinister. He opened the door, and the blizzard lunged at him, a blast of ice and fury. As he stepped out into the white chaos, one thought burned in his mind. Who would want these women dead so badly they would hire an assassin with a poison known only to the deepest parts of this territory? The wind was a physical force, a wall of ice that tried to shove him back into the cabin. Every step was a battle. Snow blinded him. The cold seared his lungs. The world was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of white. He navigated by instinct, by the memory of the ridges and canyons burned into his mind over 8 years of solitude. He thought of Sarah. He thought of her in this same wilderness, gathering her herbs, her face lit with a fierce joy. She had loved this harsh, beautiful land, and it had killed her. A sudden fever, the doctor had said. A fever that came on fast and burned hot, just like Itel's. A cold dread, colder than the wind, snaked its way around his heart. He found the cave behind a frozen waterfall, a dark slash in the white landscape. Inside, the air was still and damp. A small spring trickled from the rock wall just as he remembered, and there, growing in the crevices, were the gnarled reddish roots of the stoneheart plant. He gathered as much as he could, his fingers numb, his mind a whirlwind of fear and a dawning, terrible suspicion. The journey back was a nightmare. The storm had worsened. He fell twice, the second time twisting his knee. Pain shot up his leg, sharp and hot. He gritted his teeth and pushed on, crawling the last 100 yards to his cabin, dragging the useless leg behind him. He burst through the door, collapsing on the floor, a heap of snow and freezing misery. Ayanna and Nayeli rushed to his side, their faces pale with terror. "The root!" he gasped, pushing the frozen bundle into Ayanna's hands. "Mash it, make a tea, and use the pulp for a new poultice. Now!" As Ayanna worked frantically, Nayeli helped Sam to a chair by the fire. She cut away his trouser leg, her touch surprisingly gentle. The knee was already swelling, turning a dark, ugly purple. "You are hurt," she whispered, her eyes full of concern. "I'll live," he grunted, his gaze fixed on the bed. Ayana was forcing the dark, steaming tea between Etel's lips. Her body was rigid, her skin a ghastly gray. She looked like a corpse already. For hours, they fought for her life. Sam, his leg throbbing with a savage rhythm, directed them from the chair, using the knowledge he'd gleaned from Sarah's journal. They bathed Etel in cool water. They forced the Stoneheart tea down her throat every hour. They replaced the poultice on the poisoned wound. Sometime before dawn, something shifted. Etel's rigid body relaxed. A small sigh escaped her lips. The frantic, shallow breathing eased into a slow, deep rhythm. She was sleeping, a real sleep, not a feverish stupor. Ayana sank to the floor, her head in her hands, and for the first time, she wept. Silent, body-racking sobs of relief. Nayeli hugged her sister, tears streaming down her own face. Sam watched them, a fierce, protective feeling rising in his chest. He had done it. He had walked through hell and brought back a miracle. He had saved her, but his relief was short-lived. His eyes fell on Sarah's journal, still open on the table. He looked at the drawing of the devil's breath, the poison. He looked at Sarah's notes describing the symptoms. A burning fever, delirium, a rapid, violent death that baffled the unprepared. A fever that came on fast, just like Sarah's. He stood up, ignoring the searing pain in his knee. He limped to the mantel and picked up her photograph. He stared into her smiling eyes. 8 years, he had mourned the woman he loved, taken by a cruel, random act of nature. But it wasn't random. It couldn't have been. He looked from the photograph to the sleeping woman in his bed, saved from an identical fate. The pieces were slotting together in his mind, forming a picture so monstrous he couldn't bear to look at it. His wife hadn't died. She had been murdered, and the man who killed her was still out there. The silence in the cabin was heavy, thick with the weight of the revelation. Ayana and Nayeli watched him, their own relief overshadowed by the grim new reality that had settled over Sam's face. They saw the grief in his eyes transform into something harder, colder. The hermit of Tanto Basin was gone. In his place stood the Union veteran who had seen the worst of men at Antietam and Gettysburg. "This man," he said, his voice a low growl, "the scout who hunted you. Where did you first see him?" "Near Fort Verde," Ayana answered, her voice quiet. "He works for the commander there, Colonel Vance." Sam felt a jolt as if he'd been struck by lightning. Colonel Vance. A man known for his ruthless efficiency and his ambition. A man who had shown a particular interest in the lands around Tanto Basin, claiming they were essential for the Army's expansion. Vance had been the one behind the legal challenge to Sam's deed all those years ago. "The soldier's boss," Ayana continued. "He wants something we have. Something we took." She went to her travel pack and pulled out a small object wrapped in oilcloth. She unwrapped it carefully on the table. It was a leather-bound ledger. Sam stared at it. It was a standard Army issue accounting book. "This is what he will kill for?" he asked, incredulous. "Open it," Ayana said. He did. The pages were filled with neat columns of names, dates, and figures. At first, it looked like a simple supply ledger. Barrels of flour, crates of rifles, ammunition. But then he saw the discrepancies. Shipments marked as delivered to Army outposts that he knew had been abandoned for years. And then he saw the other side of the ledger. Payouts. Gold. To names he didn't recognize, and some he did. Ranchers who had suddenly sold their land for a fraction of its worth. Local officials. This wasn't just an accounting book. It was a record of a massive criminal enterprise. Colonel Vance wasn't just commanding a fort. He was building an empire, using Army supplies to fund a shadow army of thugs and buying off anyone who stood in his way. "My father was a clerk for the colonel," Ayana explained, her voice filled with a cold anger. "He saw what was happening. He began making his own copy of the records. Vance found out. He arranged an accident for my father. Before he died, he told me where to find this. He told us to run, to take it to someone who could expose Vance." Sam's hand shook as he turned the pages. His mind was reeling. This changed everything. This wasn't just about 3 runaway women. This was about a war for the soul of the territory. Then he saw it. A page near the back. Under a heading marked Special Acquisitions. A list of properties Vance wanted, and at the top of the list was a familiar name. Samuel Garrett. His own ranch. His eyes scanned the entries. He saw the date of the legal challenge. He saw payments made to a land surveyor in Prescott. And then his blood turned to ice. A date, just a few weeks after he had won his case in court. A payment entry next to a name he knew all too well. Reverend Mackenzie, the circuit preacher, the kindly man who visited him twice a month, offering comfort and quoting scripture. The man who had been the last person to share a meal with him and Sarah before she fell ill. The payment was for pastoral services and special herbs. Sam slammed the ledger shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the small cabin. He looked up, his eyes burning with a righteous fury that had been dormant for 8 long years. The preacher's words echoed in his memory. "Isolation ain't the same as devotion, Sam. Sarah wouldn't want you dried up like old leather." The bastard hadn't been offering comfort. He had been checking to see if his poison had worked, if the grieving widower was finally ready to break, to sell his land and disappear. "He poisoned my wife," Sam said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "That son of a bitch, he poisoned my wife for this land." He looked at the 3 women. Their plight was now his. Their enemy was his. This ledger wasn't just evidence of corruption. It was the story of his wife's murder. He limped to the cabin wall and took down his other rifle, the powerful Sharps buffalo gun he hadn't fired since the war. He checked the action, his movements precise and deadly. "The storm is letting up," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "They'll come for this book, and they'll come for us." Naeli looked at the heavy rifle, her eyes wide. "What will we do?" Sam looked out the frosted window at the gray light of dawn breaking over the snow-covered landscape. 8 years ago, they took my wife. They tried to take my land. They thought they left me a broken man, a hermit hiding from the world. He turned back to face them, the rifle resting in his arms as if it were a part of him. They were wrong. "They didn't leave a hermit," he said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time in years. "They left a soldier. And now, the war was coming to his doorstep." The day passed in a blur of tense preparation. The storm had broken, and a pale, watery sunlight filtered through the windows, making the snow-covered world outside glitter with a dangerous beauty. They knew that beauty was deceptive. The clear weather meant their enemies could travel. Sam was a man transformed. The quiet, grieving widower was gone. In his place was a field commander. He barked orders, his mind sharp and focused. He had them barricade the single window with the heavy oak table. He had Ayanna and Naeli melt snow for extra water, while he cleaned and oiled every weapon he owned, the Sharps, his Colt revolver, and an old sawed-off shotgun he kept for emergencies. "You know how to use one of these?" he asked Ayanna, holding out the Colt. She took it without hesitation, her hand steady. She checked the cylinder, her movements efficient. "My father taught me. He said a woman in this territory needed to know how to shoot more than she needed to know how to sew." Sam nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. He gave Naeli a large skinning knife. "Stay with your sister," he commanded. "If they get inside, you know what to do." The young girl's face was pale, but she gripped the knife handle tightly and nodded. Eitel was awake, weak but lucid. The poison was receding. She watched them, her dark eyes filled with a quiet strength. "In the corner," she whispered, her voice raspy. "My pack. There are things." Ayanna brought the pack. Inside were small, tightly wrapped bundles. Dried mushrooms, pungent powders, and a collection of strange, hollowed-out gourds. "What is this?" Sam asked. "Our own kind of ammunition," Itel said with a faint smile. "The yellow powder. It comes from a puffball mushroom. It is not poison, but if you throw it in a fire, it makes a thick, blinding smoke. The red powder. That is different. It will make a man's eyes burn and his lungs close up. It will not kill him, but he will wish he were dead." Sam looked at the strange powders, then at the pale, beautiful woman in his bed. He had underestimated them. They were not just victims. They were warriors, with their own weapons and their own knowledge. As dusk began to settle, casting long blue shadows across the snow, they heard it, the distant sound of horses, their hooves muffled by the snow. "They're here," Sam said, his voice calm. He took his position by the heavy log wall, peering through a small chink he had made. He counted 6 riders, moving slowly, cautiously, their rifles held at the ready. He recognized the man in the lead, Sergeant Murphy, the red-faced Irishman from the cavalry. But these weren't cavalry troopers. They were hard-faced men, civilians by their dress, mercenaries by their demeanor. Vance wasn't using the army for his dirty work. He was using paid killers. The riders fanned out, surrounding the cabin. "Garrett!" Murphy's voice boomed across the clearing. "We know you're in there, and we know who you're with. Send out the women and the book, and the colonel will be lenient." Sam didn't answer. He laid the heavy barrel of the Sharp's rifle in the chink, lining up his sights on Murphy's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. He could end this right now, one shot. But it wasn't his way. He'd seen too much killing. He wouldn't fire the first shot, but he would damn well fire the last. "Don't be a fool, Garrett!" Murphy shouted again, his voice laced with impatience. "We have 6 guns to your 1. It's over." Sam smiled grimly. "He thinks I'm alone," he whispered to Ayanna. He raised his voice, shouting back, "You're trespassing on my land, Murphy. I'm giving you 1 chance to ride away." There was a moment of silence. Then Murphy's cruel laugh echoed in the twilight. "Wrong answer." He raised his hand and gave a sharp command. A volley of gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the log walls of the cabin, splintering the wood. One found the chink Sam was using, showering his face with splinters. He pulled back, his cheek bleeding from a small cut. The siege had begun. The first hour was a brutal exchange. They fired from the cover of the trees, and Sam returned fire sparingly, making every shot count. He wasn't trying to kill them, not yet. He was trying to pin them down, to show them that this little cabin was a fortress. The heavy logs absorbed their bullets, and the Sharp's rifle had a range that kept them at a distance. But he knew it wouldn't last. They had numbers on their side. They could wait him out. Or they could rush him. As darkness fell completely, the shooting stopped. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the wind whistling through the pines. "What are they doing?" Nayeli whispered from her post by the door. "Getting ready for the real attack," Sam said. "They'll try to burn us out." He was right. A few minutes later, he saw a flicker of movement. One of the men was crawling toward the cabin, a lit torch in his hand. The cabin's roof was covered in snow, but the dry log walls would go up like kindling. "Ayanna," Sam said, his voice urgent. "The yellow powder. Get it ready." He waited, his breathing steady, his eye pressed to the chink. The man with the torch was getting closer. 20 yards. 10. He was just about to rise up and throw it. "Now," Sam whispered. Ayanna, who had crept to the hearth, threw a handful of the yellow powder into the fire. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. A huge cloud of thick, acrid smoke billowed up the chimney and mushroomed out into the night air. The wind caught it and carried it directly toward the attackers. Coughs and curses erupted from the darkness. The man with the torch stumbled to his feet, blinded and choking, and threw the torch wildly. It fell short, sputtering in the snow. Sam didn't hesitate. He sighted on the man's leg and fired. The roar of the sharps filled the cabin. The man screamed and went down, clutching his thigh. "One down," Sam said grimly. "5 to go." But their small victory was short-lived. Gunfire erupted again, this time more intense, more focused. They were angry now, and they were no longer trying to be cautious. 2 more men broke from the trees, running straight for the cabin, firing as they came. Sam took aim at the first one, but before he could fire, Ayanna was at his side, the Colt booming in her hand. She was a surprisingly good shot. Her bullet hit the dirt at the man's feet, making him dive for cover. The second man, however, kept coming. He reached the cabin, pressing himself against the wall right below the window, where Sam couldn't get a shot at him. They could hear him breathing, hear him fumbling with something. "He's setting a charge!" Sam yelled. "Get back from the wall!" It was a desperate gamble. A stick of dynamite. Enough to blow a hole in the wall big enough to walk through. There was no time to think. Nayeli, who had been crouched by the door, acted on pure instinct. With a cry that was half fear and half rage, she lifted the heavy wooden bar from the door, slipped outside, and swung it with all her might. There was a sickening crunch, a grunt of surprise, and the man slumped to the ground. Nayeli scrambled back inside, her face as white as the snow, barring the door behind her. She had just saved all their lives, but the dynamite was still there. Sam could see the sputtering fuse through the chink. 3 seconds, maybe 4. He grabbed the bucket of water they had melted. "Cover your ears!" he yelled. He kicked open the door, scooped up the stick of dynamite, and hurled it as far as he could into the darkness. He slammed the door just as the world outside erupted in a deafening roar and a flash of brilliant white light. The cabin shook on its foundations. Dirt and snow rained down on the roof. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then, from the darkness, Murphy's enraged voice bellowed, "That's it! Kill them all! Burn it to the ground!" The remaining attackers opened fire with everything they had. A relentless, deafening hail of lead hammered the small cabin. It was no longer a siege. It was an execution. They were trapped. Their tricks had run out, and the night was far from over. The assault was relentless. Bullets chewed at the logs, filling the small space with the smell of gunpowder and splintered pine. Sam knew they couldn't withstand this for long. The door, their weakest point, was beginning to splinter. "The red powder!" he yelled to Ayanna over the din. "The gourds!" He pointed to the hearth. "When I give the signal, throw them in the fire. All of them." He looked at the 3 sisters. Their faces were smudged with soot, their eyes wide but resolute. They had come to him seeking sanctuary, and he had led them into a death trap. A wave of guilt washed over him, but he shoved it down. There was no time for regret, only survival. "Nayeli," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You stay with Itel. If they break through, get her out the back. There's a loose board behind the bed. It leads to a small crawl space. Follow it to the woodpile. Run. Don't look back. Take the ledger with you." He pressed the precious book into her hands. She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "But you—" "That's an order," he said, the voice of the old soldier cutting through her protest. He turned to Ayanna. "You're with me." He took the sawed-off shotgun, a brutal close-quarters weapon. Ayanna reloaded the Colt. They stood on either side of the door, waiting. The wood was groaning, starting to crack under the assault. They could hear the men outside shouting, getting ready for the final rush. Any second now, the door would give way. "Ready?" he asked Ayanna. She nodded, her jaw set, her knuckles white on the grip of the revolver. "Now!" Sam roared. Ayanna hurled the gourds filled with the red powder into the heart of the fire. They burst open with a series of soft pops. The powder ignited, not with a cloud of smoke this time, but with a flash of brilliant emerald green flame. A thick, oily smoke poured up the chimney. Outside, the reaction was immediate. The gunfire sputtered and stopped, replaced by choked screams. Men were gagging, clawing at their eyes, their lungs on fire. Etel's ammunition had worked better than any of them had dared to hope. "It's our only chance," Sam said to Ayanna. "They're blind. We have to move now." He unbarred the door and kicked it open. The scene outside was chaos. Two men were on their knees, retching, their rifles abandoned in the snow. Murphy was staggering back toward the trees, his face buried in his arms. Sam didn't hesitate. He leveled the shotgun at the nearest man and fired. The blast echoed through the clearing like a cannon shot. The man was thrown backward into the snow. Sam racked the shotgun and turned toward the second man, but Ayanna was faster. The Colt barked twice, and the man fell silent. Only Murphy was left. He had reached the trees and was fumbling for his horse's reins, still half blinded by the gas. "I'll take him," Sam growled, starting forward, but a hand on his arm stopped him. "No," Ayanna said, her voice like ice. "He is mine." Before Sam could react, she darted past him, moving with a speed and silence that was breathtaking. She was on Murphy before he even knew she was there. He turned, his eyes wide with shock, and found the muzzle of the Colt pressed against his forehead. "You work for the man who killed my father," she said, her voice low and venomous. Murphy sputtered, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, pleading terror. "Please. I was just following orders. The Colonel—" "And you hunted my sisters like animals," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You tried to burn us alive." Sam moved forward, intending to intervene. They needed Murphy alive. He was a witness. But he stopped when he saw the look in Ayanna's eyes. It was a look he recognized. It was the face of justice, as old and unforgiving as the land itself. "This is not the white man's law, Sergeant," Ayanna whispered. "This is ours." Her finger tightened on the trigger. Sam lunged forward. "Ayanna, no, we need him!" His words broke her trance. Her finger eased off the trigger, her shoulders slumping as the killing rage left her. But the moment of hesitation was all Murphy needed. With a desperate roar, he shoved her aside and scrambled onto his horse. He dug his heels into its flanks, and the terrified animal bolted into the trees. "Damn it!" Sam cursed, raising his rifle, but it was too late. Murphy was gone, swallowed by the darkness. They had won. They had survived the night, but their victory felt hollow. Murphy was alive. He would go straight back to Colonel Vance, and Vance would not send a handful of thugs next time. He would send the entire United States Army. They had won the battle, but now they were standing in the middle of a war zone, with their faces known and their location compromised. The small cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. "We have to leave," Sam said, his voice heavy with the weight of their new reality. "Right now." He looked around the clearing at the bodies in the snow, at the bullet-riddled walls of the home he had built with his own hands. Everything he had, everything he was, had been in this small clearing. Now, it was just a crime scene. Nayeli emerged from the cabin, Etel leaning on her for support. Etel looked at the carnage, her face pale, but her eyes clear. "Where will we go?" Nayeli asked, her voice small. Sam looked south, toward the jagged mountains that marked the border with Mexico. It was their only hope. A perilous journey through hostile territory, hunted by a corrupt colonel with an army at his back. "There's a man I know," Sam said, his mind already calculating routes and risks. "A U.S. Marshal in Tucson, an honest man. I served with him in the war. If we can get this ledger to him, he can stop Vance." It was a long shot, a desperate, almost suicidal plan. Ayanna looked at him, her dark eyes searching his. "You would do this? For us?" Sam looked at the ledger, then at the photo of his wife he had tucked into his coat. "No," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I'm doing this for her." He was no longer just protecting 3 refugees, he was hunting his wife's killer. And he would tear down the entire U.S. Army to get to him. They left within the hour, melting into the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts. They took only what they could carry: weapons, ammunition, the ledger, and what little food was left. Sam didn't even look back at the cabin. The man who had lived there was dead. He had died in the first volley of gunfire. The journey south was a descent into a beautiful, brutal hell. Sam pushed them relentlessly, his wounded knee a constant, throbbing agony. He knew Vance would have patrols scouring the entire territory for them. Their only advantage was the wilderness itself. Sam knew the canyons and hidden trails better than any soldier. And the sisters. They were born to this land. They moved through it with a grace and certainty that humbled him. Ayanna was the leader, fierce and strategic. Nayeli, her innocence shattered by the siege, had become their eyes and ears, her sharp senses spotting signs of pursuit long before Sam did. And Etel, though still weak, possessed a knowledge of the land that was their salvation. She found them clean water in dry creek beds, edible roots to supplement their dwindling rations, and herbs to treat Sam's festering knee. They became a unit, a strange, desperate family forged in violence and grief. The barriers between them, race, language, loss, crumbled away under the sheer pressure of survival. In the quiet moments around a small, smokeless fire, they shared their stories. Sam spoke of Sarah, not as a saintly ghost, but as the vibrant, laughing woman she had been. The sisters spoke of their home, their people, their father's quiet courage. One night, as they huddled together for warmth under a rock overhang, Ayanna reached out and took his hand. Her thumb traced the pale, untanned line on his finger where his wedding ring used to be. "Your heart is no longer a dry river, Samuel Garrett," she whispered. He looked at her, then at her sisters sleeping peacefully beside them. He felt a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It wasn't a betrayal of Sarah. It was a continuation. He was alive, his heart was beating, and it was beating for the women beside him. They saw the smoke from the army patrols twice. The first time, they hid in a narrow crevice, holding their breath as a dozen cavalrymen rode past so close they could hear the jingle of their spurs. The second time, they were not so lucky. They were crossing a wide, open mesa when the patrol spotted them. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "It's over," Nayeli whispered, her face ashen. "No, it's not," Sam said, his voice grim. He pushed the ledger into Ayanna's hands. "Take your sisters, get to the rocks, I'll hold them off." "We will not leave you," Ayanna cried. "That's an order," he roared, his face a mask of desperation. "Get that book to the marshal, that's all that matters. Avenge my wife Ayanna, avenge your father." He kissed her then. A hard, desperate kiss filled with everything he couldn't say. Then he pushed her away and turned to face the charging cavalry. He dropped to one knee, rested the Sharp's rifle on a rock, and began to shoot. He wasn't aiming to kill. He was aiming for the horses. He was a dead man already, but he would buy them every second he could. He saw the sisters reach the cover of the rocks. He saw Ayanna look back one last time, her face a portrait of anguish. Then the world exploded in a hail of gunfire. He felt a searing pain in his shoulder, then another in his side. The rifle slipped from his grasp. The world tilted, the blue sky turning to gray, then to black. His last thought was of Sarah's smile. He woke to the smell of whiskey and stale cigar smoke. He was lying on a cot in a dim, dusty room. A man with a thick mustache and a silver star pinned to his vest was sitting in a chair beside him. "Welcome back to the living, Sam," the man said. It was Marshal John Bork, his old friend from the war. Sam struggled to sit up, his body screaming in protest. "The women, the ledger—" "Safe," Bork said, holding up the leather-bound book. "The girls brought you in, carried you for 2 days, saved your life. Then they told me one hell of a story." He tapped the ledger. "A story this book seems to confirm." "Vance?" Sam asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I sent a wire to the territorial governor. A federal warrant is on its way. Colonel Vance is about to find out what happens when you mistake the U.S. Army for your personal piggy bank. A grim smile touched Bork's lips. And when you murder a war hero's wife. Relief washed over Sam, so powerful it almost made him pass out again. It was over. Justice for Sarah. And the preacher? Sam asked. Reverend Mackenzie, Bork said, spitting the name out like something foul, is already in my jail. He sang like a canary. It was done. They had won. A few days later, when Sam was strong enough to walk, Bork took him to the edge of town. The three sisters were waiting, mounted on fresh horses, their packs filled with supplies. They were heading south to Mexico. The marshal has arranged safe passage for us, Ayanna said. She looked different. The weight of the hunt was gone from her eyes. She looked free. Sam didn't know what to say. Thank you felt too small. I love you felt too large, too complicated. Nayeli was the one who broke the silence. She dismounted and threw her arms around him in a fierce hug. You will be happy now, Samuel Garrett, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. Etel simply touched his cheek, her healer's hands warm and gentle. Your heart is a strong river now, she said. Let it flow. Then came Ayanna. She stood before him, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. No words were necessary. They had walked through the fire together and come out the other side. You will come find us? She asked, her voice soft. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I will. He watched them ride south until they were just 3 small specks against the vast, sun-drenched horizon. He stood there for a long time, feeling the Arizona sun on his face. The hermit was dead. The soldiers' war was over. He didn't know who he was now, but for the first time in 8 years, he knew he had a future. He turned and walked back toward the town, not to a lonely cabin, but to a new life. A life that was waiting for him just across the border. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the heart of the Arizona Territory, a place where the lines between good and evil, love and vengeance, are often blurred by the dust of the frontier. If this story of survival and justice moved you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your engagement helps these stories from the past reach new audiences. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more tales from the American West. Remember, sometimes the greatest wilderness isn't the land around us, but the one inside our own hearts. And sometimes, the only way to find your way out is to let a stranger in from the storm.